Hello there, Robert John Hadfield here again from Audiomover, the company that takes your old audio and videotapes and converts them into digital. And a lot of the videos we make, we talk about cassette tapes and 8-tracks and how they work, and we look inside them and things like that. But we've been doing some videos talking about a different type of analog recording, which are records, which I'm a nut for. I actually have thousands of these things. Matter of fact, I think I have 3 copies of the album that we're going to talk about today. You'll notice that there's a price tag on this one. One of my recent trips out to Denver, it looks like I bought this for $4, which is kind of amazing because a lot of records these days are way more expensive than that. So maybe I bought it more than recently. But I still buy records. It's my little collection. My little guilty pleasure is collecting old records, and they're fun to have. And the whole experience, I loved the experience of vinyl, the experience of having records and buying them and bringing them home, and the whole tactile, multi-sensory experience of records was such a great thing. And anyway, so it's fun to talk about them, and so we thought we'd make some videos about some records, since we have thousands of them here, and I like talking about them. So the one that I'm going to talk about today, this one's pretty cool. This was, of course, Robert Plant's first solo album after Led Zeppelin broke up. And I remember when this album came out, so I was pretty young when this came out, and I was very young when Led Zeppelin broke up, when John Bonham died. I mean, I was too young to really be aware, to be paying attention to popular music at the time. I liked Kiss. I was one of those little kids that liked Kiss, but that was all I was really familiar with. And so when this came out, I think it was 81 or 82. We'll find out in just a second. I knew who it was. It was Robert Plant. That's the Led Zeppelin guy. And so I was so excited to get it, just so to feel cool that I was buying something from somebody from Led Zeppelin. And when I bought it, though, I was kind of going, huh? I mean, it really was such a... At the time, for a young kid, especially one that was that liked Kiss, this album made no sense to me at all. But I listened to it over and over and over again, especially the first side. And I actually grew to love some of the music on this album, and really, really grew to appreciate it. But Robert Plant, you can hear some Led Zeppelin influence in here, or some of his history, but man, he really went off and kind of did something different. And that's what this album was. It really was him just being who Robert Plant was, kind of going off on his own way. And when he would tour, he didn't play Led Zeppelin music. It was all his solo stuff. If you went to see Robert Plant play live at that time, you weren't going to get Led Zeppelin. You were going to get Robert Plant's solo music. And of course, I mean, what are you going to do? He's Robert Plant. He can do whatever he wants to do. You're going to go see him no matter what he does. Even if you don't like the music, he's still Robert Plant. He's the god, one of the gods of rock and roll, gods of rock, the singer for Led Zeppelin. So anyway, I bought this when I was a kid. This is not the version. This is not the one I bought. I think I have it in the front office with the record collection. But I remember studying this cover. It made no sense to me. It still doesn't. There's a fire hose and a fire. Robert Plant, Pictures 11. I don't know. I never really understood what this was supposed to mean. If you know, put it down in the comments and tell me what this means to you, because I don't know what this means. But anyway, it was Robert Plant. So let's flip it over and look at the other side. And then here it was. Apparently the thing puts out the fire, and then Robert Plant disappears. But what was fun about records, once again, is you would sit here and study this while you're listening to the music. That was part of the experience, is you had this art that you could look at and study. And I'd notice little things like, this light that came and then was there, and then now he's gone, but the light's still there, and it was just... Anyway, it was a fun thing back then, studying this stuff, even on a really, really simple album like this. And you'll see down here in the corner that this was Swan Song, which was the label that Led Zeppelin was putting their stuff out under for a while. And let's see if we can see what the date is on here? 1982. Okay, so this came out in 1982. And the tracks on this album, the first song, Burning Down One Side, like I said, when I first listened to this, it made no sense to me. But over time, I listened to that song a lot, and I love that song. I love that song. It's so cool. Nothing on this album can you sing along with, really, or has a hook or a catchy thing in it. It's just not that kind of a record. This is what you were going to get out of Robert Plant when he was by himself, and he just did whatever he wanted to do, and it ended up being some really good music. So Burning Down One Side was a really, really great song. Moonlight and Samosa was a real, very soft, mellow, slow kind of song. Pledge Pin, I can't even remember how it went, but it was actually a really cool song too. I remember that I liked this whole first song. Slow Dancer is the closest thing you're going to get on this album to something that sounds like Led Zeppelin, and it has that kind of the closest thing I can compare it to is maybe Kashmir. It has that kind of a feel to it. It just was really powerful. So that was, if you wanted a Led Zeppelin sound, the song Slow Dancer, I think, was kind of the closest thing you're going to come to it. Worse Than Detroit, I don't remember how these went. Fat Lip. Except these two at the end, Like I've Never Been Gone, that's like a really mellow, more modern version of kind of like a, you can get a little bit of Since I've Been Loving You. You know, classic Led Zeppelin, a little bit of that. You can sense that in there, a little bit of that. And then this song, Mystery Title, it was reminiscent of stuff on Houses of the Holy a little bit. So there were these little things in there that did feel a little bit like Led Zeppelin, but Robert Plant was kind of determined, I think, to let that go and to have that be a certain phase in his life, and he was just going to do his next thing. And he kept putting out solo albums. I mean, this was his first solo album, and he just kept cranking them out after that. And some of them were more successful than the others. The next album after this one, which was called Principle of Moments, actually had I think 2 hits on it. One of them was called Big Log, if I'm not mistaken, and the other one was I'll think of it in just a second. But In the Mood. I'm in the mood for a melody. I'm in the mood for a melody. I'm in the mood. That was on the next album. So we did have, some semi-hits that came from this stuff. But let's open it up and look on the inside, because there's some interesting things in here. So here are the guys in the band. And for guitar, bass, keyboards, these people were not really big fans. I mean, Robert Plant could have had anybody. And Robbie Blunt, kind of mostly an unknown at the time. Paul Martinez, kind of the same thing. Jez Woodruff, he was like a session player. I mean, these are the people that he had: guitar, bass, keyboards. Robbie Blunt played on this album, the next album, the album after that. So he kind of became, at least for those 3 albums, he was, Robert Plant's right-hand man there with making this music. But the 3 people here weren't that well known. But then you get down to drums. You get down to the drummer, and this is so interesting. Because the first thing you see here, the first drummer, you see 2 drummers listed. First one, Phil Collins. And the answer to your question is yes. That's actually the actual Phil Collins from Genesis, solo artist Phil Collins, monster hits, huge, super, super famous Phil Collins played drums on this album. And it's interesting because Phil Collins not only played drums on part of this album, he played on the next album, Principle of Moments, and he went on the entire tour playing for Robert Plant as the drummer, and that's it. Yes, Phil Collins, super famous, mega superstar Phil Collins, toured with Robert Plant on the Principle of Moments tour. Didn't play any Led Zeppelin music, and they just noted. I mean, I actually saw that concert. And there's Phil Collins playing drums on the stage and just barely acknowledged the fact that was Phil Collins. They didn't play any Phil Collins music. They didn't play any Led Zeppelin music, but it tells you something. However big and huge Phil Collins was and is as a musician, when Robert Plant calls and tells you to go on tour, you just go. And it tells you who the real rock star. Even Phil Collins knew who the real rock star was. He was willing to go on a tour as nothing but the drummer for Robert Plant on the entire tour. And we all knew who Phil Collins was, but there he was, just sitting there on the stage playing drums for Robert Plant, who's the real god. So anyway, just amazing thinking about that. Phil Collins played on here. And then Cozy Powell. Cozy Powell, another hugely famous drummer. I mean, this guy, of course, later, after this, I think it was after this, if you remember the band Emerson, Lake and Palmer, well, it became Emerson, Lake and Powell with Cozy Powell. I mean, Cozy Powell, before this, had played with Rainbow, he'd played with Jeff Beck, so he was an established name, much like Phil Collins was. So, you know, Robert Plant was not messing around when he picked up the drummers, but these other guys, and I don't want to say he was messing around, but he certainly wasn't going after famous people with these other parts, but he on the drums got super famous people. I mean, Cozy Powell even, I think, played with Black Sabbath for a short period of time. So anyway, the album is produced by Robert Plant. And then, you know, it just goes down and tells you a little bit more about who was on the album. Then the other side, I kind of like it sometimes when they do this and they just make it super simple. And then there's Robert Plant, Pictures of 11. And let's just take a look at the album inside here real quick. And you'll see there's the famous Swan Song logo that you would see on Led Zeppelin albums. And I think Bad Company had the same thing on theirs, but it's that really famous image that we'd see on anything that was released under Swan Song. Anyway, this was a really, it didn't, I don't know that this album did well, but it was a really important album in rock music history simply because this was Robert Plant's first solo attempt, first thing after Led Zeppelin. And, you know, it took Jimmy Page a little longer to come out because he put together the Firm, I think it was a couple of years after this, with Paul Rodgers and a couple other real famous people. So that was Jimmy Page, didn't really do anything solo, but it took him, I think, a little bit longer before he showed up again on the scene after Led Zeppelin broke up. But, you know, this was so important because here's this guy, Robert Plant, and that had such a massive impact on rock music when you look at all the stuff that Led Zeppelin had done. Here he was with that great voice, and it's unmistakable when you listen to this album. It is Robert Plant. I mean, you hear his voice and you just know exactly who it is. And it was just I once again, when I first heard it, I was too young to appreciate it, and just over time, I started to learn that this really was a really solid, really excellent offering that Robert Plant put together here. So anyway, if you haven't listened to a couple of tunes, especially if you're a Led Zeppelin fan and you want to hear something cool by Robert Plant, that one Slow Dancer that I talked about, bust that one out. And that will give you that kind of Led Zeppelin feeling when you listen to it. But anyway, this is really something worth listening to if you haven't heard it before. There's some great stuff on here. So anyway, if you enjoy these videos, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and by all means, please leave comments. If you know things that I don't know about this stuff, put it down there. I love reading these comments that people notice things that I haven't mentioned before or mentioned in these videos. And also, if you have old audio videotapes you need converted to digital, go to Audiomover. That's audiomover.com and get your order started there. Anyway, with that, have a fantastic day.